In other words, knowledge, the external world or something like that, knowledge of objects, identity over time, that assumes a self, right? So that's one of the transcendental categories. So I think that all the transcendental categories are interrelated. And that's why I think that really it's a question of Christian metaphysics. So I would rather put Christian metaphysics into that section. And that's what leads to the notion of God that we have. So, but I agree, like if you left it as just something like, I forget what example you use. What'd you say? It's something like pick your logic, right? So if you just said logic,
ability to have knowledge, something like that.
Yeah, I think that might be a little ambiguous. So I like to say the entire Christian paradigm.
I guess with that is, I mean, you would have to like add quantifiers into the argument there, because then you'd have to have something like for all transcendental X. God is a necessary precondition, or that transcendental implies God. I mean, that's fine. You could do that, but I guess it would be like the same question then, kind of like, well,
that's why I always say that I think the argument is better as the entire paradigm. That's what's going in there. And then usually people then are just trying to figure out who disagree. Well, can you even put an entire paradigm into an argument? I don't see why you can't, but.
Oh, so you kind of like don't really endorse this argument because you don't think that arguments work for this kind of like paradigm talk.
No, I think they do work for paradigms when you put paradigm into the correct place.
So, I mean, maybe an easier way to ask is like,
well, let me put it this way.
Yeah,
Christianity is the net. So I like X is a necessary condition of Y therefore X, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
Christianity is the necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge. And the reason, the way of getting to that is that for the quote possibility of knowledge, that would include all the transcendental categories. Because if you toss out one of them, knowledge is no longer justifiable.
Okay, so then we can kind of fill in the variables here, and it's like necessarily possibility of knowledge implies, I guess, do you want to say like Christianity or God's existence or something like that?
Well, I want it to be specific, like not just God's existence, because God's existence might be all kinds of different theisms that I don't think are compatible. And a big part of the argument is having the right metaphysic, and that includes the Trinity. So you need the essence and distinction. You need to
this kind of orthodox. So maybe we fill in for X like this kind of orthodox Christian worldview. So like necessarily the possibility of knowledge implies like the orthodox Christian worldview. Okay, so then I guess now that I'm like clear about what the variables are here, then the kind of original question was like, how do we motivate this?
What do you mean?
Like what's the argument for this premise?
Well, it's a argument about the possibility of arguing at all. So the way I argue it has two moves that we make. So depending upon who the argument is against, it's an impossibility to the contrary. And then the positive side of the argument is the Christian metaphysic and its claims.
I mean, you're just like not talking to anybody in particular. You're just like kind of writing out what the support
is. Always, but by the very necessity of the argument, it's an argument of comparison of paradigms. So it has to have some argument that I'm comparing against, some position, some worldview. So what's your position?
Well, like, look, suppose that I had a position, you showed it the false, that like wouldn't help to show the premise is true. That's kind of why I'm asking, like, supposing that you're not talking to somebody, like, how do you motivate this?
I just said it has two parts. That's what I just said.
No. So the point is,
I just said it's not just a matter of demonstrating the impossibility of the contrary. It's also the positive of positing and arguing for the Christian metaphysic.
Right. So then that would be what I'm asking for is like, what is it that tells you that these kind, like the possibility of knowledge necessitates the Christian metaphysic, and kind of showing some other specific view to be false isn't going to help you there.
The thing I said at the beginning, which is that the transcendental categories necessitate a certain type of world, a certain type of view of time and space, history, the self, etc., which the Christian metaphysic gives an account for.
I was just telling you, like, if there's the possibility of knowledge, then Orthodox Christianity is true.
Because the Christian metaphysic and orthodoxy is unique, and it deals with every one of those transcendental categories.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it is unique. So,
Well, let me rephrase that. I don't mean to say that it's true because it's unique, but I'm saying that the type of metaphysic, the type of theology that's offered is an answer to a lot of those problems that you have in worldviews that don't have that that theology, that metaphysic. For example, it solves the problem of the one and many. It solves the problems of universals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those typical kinds of problems are not a problem in this paradigm. So it doesn't fall prey to foundational critiques that most worldviews fall prey to.
so you're saying, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You can continue.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Are you just saying like that all these transcendental categories that you might fill in for why orthodox?
Well, you can demonstrate that. So it's going to be, first of all, the impossibility of the contrary, depending upon which argument you're going against. And if you're saying, well, maybe there's a position out there that we don't know that can answer that. Well, then at that point, I can just say, well, there's only a certain number of moves that you can make in any basic starting point for metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. There's not an infinite number of worldviews and positions out there. There's actually only a few. And you could say, is knowledge objective or is it subjective? Are ethics subjective or are they relative? Is reality teleological or disteleological? And any way you go on some of these fundamental either ors is going to determine the rest of your set of beliefs. So I don't have to refute all worldviews.
I'm fine with saying, presumably through that process, you would refute all the other worldviews, no?
No, I'm saying I don't have to give an exhaustive refutation of an infinite number of worldviews if I can refute all the other worldviews in that way. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not like committed to saying that there are an infinite number of worldviews, or even if there were, that you couldn't do the thing you just described, where maybe all worldviews.
Do an infinite number of series of every worldview. If I can start with the foundational premises of metaphysics and epistemology or ethics, then that's the point of the transcendental categories, that they only work, they only cohere, they only make sense, they're only justified in a Christian paradigm. That's the point.
Yeah, so, I get that that's the premise. And then you're saying the way that you would motivate that is you would show like, look, there's a kind of finite amount of permutations of ways that you answer certain fundamental questions. And the Orthodox Christian worldview answers this finite set of fundamental questions in a way that can account for all these transcendental categories. And every other worldview answers these questions in a different way than that, which doesn't account for like these transcendental categories.
Correct. And not just that it doesn't account, but actually the answers that they give actually make knowledge impossible.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if you can lay that out.
Yeah. So again, you mean going through the basic fundamental questions? I mean, we can re-ask the questions that I just asked. So is is reality teleological or disteleological? Right. They're like, you got to pick on that. Right. So it's either meaningful at a universal scale, grand scale, or it's not.
And then you want to say that there's only one way you can answer this question that would allow for some transcendental category.
How you answer that question will then dictate the other things that follow from that, right? So if you say that it's teleological, that it has meaning and so forth, then you're going to have, then there are things like intentionality and purpose, meaning to history and so forth. So it's going to necessitate other beliefs.
You can kind of give the argument that only Orthodox Christianity answers these fundamental questions in that way, and that no other worldview does.
So you cut out there at the beginning. Say that again.
Oh, I'm wondering what the argument is that only Orthodox Christianity answers these questions in a way that kind of allows for the possibility of knowledge, and none of the other worldviews answer the questions in a way which does allow for the possibility of knowledge.
So again, we would walk through different versions, different steps, different takes. So why don't we use your worldview as an example?
Yeah, so it's false, and then I jump to non-Orthodox Christianity because we've not showed that premise is true. Do you see the problem?
You cut out. Can you say it again?
Suppose that I give this contrary, we walk through and it turns out my contrary does not account for the possibility of knowledge. Now, there's a question about the next step. Do I accept Orthodox Christianity? No, I'll just reject my worldview and go looking for another. But that's why I'm asking
Right, but because we've chosen one element of the worldview, it doesn't, like, the rest of the worldview follows, right? So just because we're choosing one element of it, it doesn't follow that there's an infinite number of other possible worldviews that can solve that dilemma. So the point is that that's just one element that we've chosen to walk through. We could pick another topic in epistemology and walk through that and get to the same conclusion. So that's the point of the various basics that we could start with.
Yeah, but I mean, unless we sit here and like you talk me out of every other worldview, then it seems fruitless that we're going to get to like orthodox.
Already granted that I don't have to refute every possible world.
Sorry, I just mean like every other answer to this kind of finite set of questions. That's what I mean there.
Well, I mean, that's why it's a lot better if we actually posit what your worldview is, which you don't seem to want to do.
Well, I mean, we can do that. I'm just saying that then, like, if my worldview is false and you haven't answered the original question, then like my next move isn't to jump to Orthodox Christianity.
But it's a positive step because Christianity doesn't just account for one basic metaphysical premise. It accounts for all the transcendental categories that you need that all go together. That's why it's a argument for all of them working together, as I said. Not every worldview can account for those things because, again, I think if you understand what those things are, what the transcendental categories are, there aren't other worldviews that can account for those things.
Well, I mean, okay, so like I'm willing to do the like worldview thing if you want to ask me like one of these kind of what you consider fundamental questions, but just refer back to what I said before, like without some argument for that premise, then I don't know how this exercise is going to get us like Orthodox Christianity.
Because the argument is specifically that Orthodox Christianity provides the necessary preconditions for the transcendental categories. The transcendental categories are the preconditions for the possibility of knowledge at all.
And then like talking to me and then like showing my view is false wouldn't like make that premise true, right?
Right. And that's why the other transcendental categories are part of the discussion and part of the debate, even though as finite human beings, we have to choose one thing to talk about at a time. Right.
But like this exercise isn't anything in support of that premise. You agree with that?
In support of which premise?
That necessarily for the possibility of knowledge that implies the Orthodox Christian worldview.
Process or in the argument in terms of how I make it. So that's why I said that possibility of the contrary doesn't necessarily mean that my position is true. That's why it also includes the additional arguments for the rest of the worldview, the metaphysics, and so forth.
Well, I mean, if you accept classical logic, and possibility of the contrary would just imply that your worldview is true.
Well, it would imply that if you look at like modern epistemic debates, even in possibility, even retorsion doesn't necessarily prove my position.
I mean, classical logic has like negation introduction. So if like not P implies Q and not Q, then that implies P.
Yeah, but this is addressed in Quine. This is addressed in modern epistemology. So you're trying to play a game here. I know what you're saying.
What was addressed in Quine's?
That just because a position appears to be irrational or impossible doesn't prove that the other system is necessarily the case.
No, so only if all of them, like if all of them are, right? So if all of them except for one are impossible, then like given classical logic, the one that's not impossible is true. Just given classical logic.
Right, but this isn't, the particular argument here is metalogical. It's not an argument about first order logic. It's an argument that is about the possibility of doing logic. So the only way to argue those kinds of positions that are meta are going to be pre-logical. They're still using logic. So it doesn't mean that because we're using logic, it's invalid. It just means that it's an argument about the use of logic itself. So it's not going to be done the exact same way that normal argumentation or logical problems are done.
Oh, I mean, the syllogism I have in front of me is just using like basic first order modal logic.
But a syllogism that's using that form, it also depends on what you stick in there. So the fact that it's using a syllogism does not mean that it's just a first order problem, because we're talking about logic itself. So it's metalogical.
Well, I mean, metalogic has to do with like soundness and completeness of a formal system. This is just an argument for the proposition that necessarily the Orthodox Christian worldview is true. It's just using
logic at all is what we're talking
it's just using first order propositional logic. But I mean, this isn't important to like get stuck on, I don't think.
You're trying to collapse the type of argument that it is into a type of argument that it isn't. That's why it matters. So I know what metalogic is.
Yeah, but this isn't a metalogic argument.
It is.
What do you think a metalogic argument is? It's
an argument if we pick logic as the transcendental category, this would be a metalogical argument about the possibility of logic at all. How do we know logic is even logical? In that way, it is a metalogical argument.
Well, sorry, the conclusion of the one I'm talking about is just necessarily the Orthodox Christian worldview is true. You stick in logic for why, it doesn't become a metalogical argument.
It's prior to logic.
Well, if it's prior to logic, then like I could just accept all the premises and reject the conclusion because we're not making this in any formal system.
It's a category mistake.
It's a category mistake to say this is a metalogical argument because it's just in first order modal logic.
The fact that the problem that the form of the argument that you're looking at from the Discord, right? I understand that's modal logic. I understand what you're talking about. But what matters is what you stick in there into the various, right, premises, right? And so the fact that we're talking about if the referent is outside of or prior to logic, that doesn't make it still first order. It's beyond.
Yeah, like if you stick something different into the content, it doesn't change the formal system that you're working under. This isn't hard.
Without logic itself, then it does, because it's beyond.
No, that's like an elementary mistake. But I mean, this isn't even an important point.
Because the transcendental argument is about it's prior to the doing of logic.
Well, I mean, you can say that, but the point I'm making
that is the argument.
Yeah, that's fine to say that it's an argument about logic, but all that I'm saying is that changing the content of an argument doesn't change the formal system. It doesn't change the rules of the formal system the argument is given in.
It's about the formal systems themselves.
Then you wouldn't be giving it in this form. Oh my, so.
You just gave me an example from the Discord. I don't have it in front of me, and I don't have a problem saying that. We can talk about formal argumentation I said X is a necessary condition of Y therefore X, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So does that mean that if I say that this is an argument about logic itself, I can't do that?
No, you can still do that because you're still working in the same formal system.
No, this is Gödel's incompleteness theorem is about this very point.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. Systems.
I'm very familiar with Gödel's. It has nothing to do with this.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. So when systems go outside of themselves, it's a metalogical problem. It's no longer a problem that's within the system. So if we're talking about a transcendental argument about the possibility of logic, then it's no longer a first order type of argument. Even if you stick it into X is a necessary condition of Y therefore X, it is no longer just a first order problem.
Yeah, I mean, look, Gödel's incompleteness theorem doesn't say that, but I really don't want to get stuck on this point.
It says that sets appeal outside of themselves.
No,
is a complete set. Yes, it does.
It says that if a formal system, is consistent, then it's not complete. That's what Gödel's incompleteness.
What is your world? Yeah, exactly. Incompleteness theorem, right? And so he's arguing against Bertrand Russell that you could have an exhaustive set theory, right? That's totally
that didn't have to do with set
theory. It is
theory.
an argument against Bertrand. Yes, it is. It is an argument against Bertrand Russell's exhaustive view of set theory.
Well, it wasn't. No, because I know what you're thinking of, and you're thinking of
your worldview. What's your worldview? Let's have the argument about your worldview, because that's how the transcendental.
If you're saying you like can't give an argument for premise 3, we can move on and do the worldview comparison. I'm fine with that.
What's your worldview?
So my worldview about what? Like ask me some question.
Come on.
My worldview about what, Jay?
Are you an atheist?
Yeah.
Okay. So is all of reality reducible to matter? Are you a materialist?
I'm not sure what you mean by matter. I'm skeptical of the material distinction.
This gay laugh. We're moving on because he's not going to answer the questions. He knows what materialism is. Right. So again, talking around gibberish. Who's next? Thank you.